what I'm going to go through in terms of the tips and tricks in this session is I'm going to go through what I call plan, set, check, and tweak. Now, what I mean by this is basically when it comes to your business, there's many different elements within your business that you want to really tweak those efficiencies on. So the first kind of step in terms of whether you're talking inventory or AR or GL is planning what you want to actually report on. Now, after you essentially work out what you're going to report on, you then want to set up some kind of ways of automating certain features, or like trying to work out ways to smarter methods of actually doing this. And then once those have been set up, you then want to actually check and track how we're doing versus what we originally were thinking. And that really leads into the latter part, which is kind of fine-tuning the process. So as Ronnie mentioned before, there's a theory of minimum viable product, but it's really kind of constantly adapting to really tweak what's actually happening and to kind of really drive those efficiencies to make your business better. Now, from that point of view, what I'm going to look at is I'm going to actually look at these three sections. So in terms of the AR side of things, I'm just going to give you a few ideas around invoice to payment. So how we can kind of track that, and then how we can kind of fine tune that. Also have a little look at expense tracking. So, ways around how can we make sure that expenses are coming in, what are we missing out on, what approvals are, not coming through in a timely manner. And then the latter bit I'll mention about is the GL end of month process. Now, this is obviously a wider ranging subject, and it goes across multiple modules within MYOB Advanced, but it's really kind of starting to give you a bit of an idea, or, setting things in your brain to think, how do we do this, and how can we actually streamline those elements? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my MYOB Advanced tenant. And the first area, like I said, is all centered around the AR side of things. And the subject that I've picked, and there's many subjects within the system that you can report on, but the first section I've picked on is to do with really trying to work out how we get paid. So when we send out the invoice, what is the due date versus the paid date, and working out what is the average days paid, not only from a customer level, but we could also start to incorporate things like customer address or customer location level. So really trying to, hone that report. Now, on my dashboard, I've added in a couple of new tiles myself. So again, as Ronnie said, the system comes with default reports, but this is where you can start to fine tune it to suit your own business. So simply from here, I've built a days to pay and average days paid. So this one is kind of a KPI widget that tells me overall as a business, it takes 43.89 days to get paid. And then further down, we can actually see that this is an individual breakdown of each customer, and also the outstanding documents as well, or how much they've actually spent with us. So if I drill directly into this average days paid, so from a reporting point of view, it's really determining what you want to see. So from this point of view, what I've essentially done, like I said before, is I've worked out and created a generic inquiry to highlight when the invoice was first created, when the due date is, and when it was essentially closed. So when it was paid in full, and then we can work out and determine the days to pay amount. And from that point of view, we can then start to see that information flowing through. Now, again, it depends on what you want to track, so it's entirely up to you how you set this up. But from this kind of base generic inquiry, we can then go, right, I want to actually pivot that. Now, if I pivot it by customer, so I can create a pivot grid based on that generic inquiry, you can now see that I can set it up to say, I want to look at my customers, and then grouping the customers and grouping the invoices by customer, we can then start to see this is the kind of like average days to pay based on those customers. So you can see at the top, lifestyle takes 743 days, which is a lot, versus someone like 9bar, which are quite low in terms of that side of things. Now, from a reporting perspective, it's perfect to see on your dashboard because you can see and track based on what happens throughout the history of the transactions. But how do you start to kind of like fine tune them? And how do you actually track elements like that? So one of the options is that from a recording point of view, you could use something like a business event and utilize the average days generic inquiry. Now, what I mean by that is if I just jump into my under system management, we've got business events, and business events allow you to actually set up multiple automated scenarios. So whether or not you're doing import scenarios or whether or not you're doing email notifications, this area really is driven based on these generic inquiries. So once something gets changed, it triggers to actually send something. So as you can imagine, this would work throughout the system based on these generic inquiries. Now, what I could do from that point of view is I could actually set up an import scenario for average days to pay, and then I can get it based on a new field value changing on the days to pay. I could actually get it to fire an import scenario and import in to wherever I want it to. Now, when you're recording and really setting this, if I look at my receivables and look at my customers, we can then start to see that on 9bar Coffee, where do we actually track that? So you've got a couple of options where you're tracking this information, and this can be constantly updated. So you can either set up a user definable field, and under customization, you've got manage user definable fields, and you can actually use attributes and push those across into the screens and have them sat within there. And that just means that you can set them up yourselves. You don't have to do any customization. You just set up a user definable field. Alternatively, you could potentially add it into the financial area and just add an extra field down the bottom of here just to say average days, and then that will update based on that business event. Now, like I said before, once you kind of go through that process, you've then got to check it to see what actually happens. So for things like that, it means that you could then, on the average days paid, you could potentially set up another pivot, which could show you on a month-by-month basis. So you can actually start to see, are they getting better at paying? Now, based on that, if they're not getting better at paying, then that's where you can incorporate the tweaks. So from that point of view, from a invoice point of view, what you could potentially do is you could actually, if I go into invoices and memos, and I just go into an invoice that we already have. So one kind of way that you can do it is you could actually set up on the form an active link directly to, essentially going through and giving a link to pay. So Stephen mentioned about it before, which is using things like Easy Collect. And you can see down the bottom here, we can actually utilize a payment method or a payment vendor to actually take that payment, and then that feeds directly back into the system via that, or you can get it to link off and they can look at all their invoices, pay what they need to, and then that all flows back into the system. Now, just building something like this, a simple link directly into a form, it then means that from a customer point of view, you can then go back to your customer, and you can even set up on a customer, you can set up and define their own documents. So under mail settings, we could actually change the document. So under invoice here, we could change the report to be that new method that has a payment link for people who generally pay a little bit slower than your normal customers. So again, it's just working out first, what do we report on? Secondly, how do we update information? And then thirdly, checking it and then tweaking that to suit what we actually need. And it may be even the fact that you set up a thing like a customer class to actually, put those customers linked into. Now, for the second part, in terms of the AP side of things, the second bit I'm just going to mention about is to do with expense tracking. So from an expense point of view, we can set up different things. So we've got expenses, timesheets coming in from your employees, and obviously you can do certain things with bills coming in and from your suppliers. But within here, you can see that I've got unapproved expenses. So in terms of tracking every single month, I need to chase my expenses, make sure that they get put in, and the same thing with timesheets. So how can we actually set that up to track how many we've got outstanding and how many unapproved expenses have we got outstanding as well? So again, from the kind of offset, it's building that generic inquiry to, in this case, look at overdue approvals. So we can see these are all the overdue approvals. We can even see again how long it's been since these have been sat waiting for someone to actually approve. And then from here we can see this is the assigned approver. And so using this feature, we can then build a business event to actually send a notification template to the approvers. So they may have already received that to say you've got an approval waiting, and they can go and approve that. But it may be after a certain set number of days, it sends off an email directly to them again to say you've still got this outstanding, or you actually drive it to send it to the next level up for that side of things. Now, another kind of area that you could do in terms of missing time cards, and this is quite a useful report as well that I've kind of added. So if we look at Caroline Bond, and we look at 2022-06, just building something like this will actually allow you to then go, right, these are the missing timesheets from our employees. And again, it means that we can track it to see how many we've actually got missing and outstanding for this period. But then what do we do from it? So from this, again, we can do a business event that we can then send out to the employee or send out to the manager to say, you haven't entered a timesheet into the system, and you need to actually go through and add those in. So what I would say is the first element for the expenses and timesheets is really tracking what's missing or tracking what needs to be approved. And then you can build your business events to suit that side of things. But then ultimately, the next kind of area would be really kind of capturing, if we go back to the overdue approvals, you can actually start to build in pivots to say, right, based on this, who do we normally get late approvals from? So you're trying to find out where the bottlenecks are. Who are the timesheet main offenders? I myself, terrible at timesheets, I'll definitely point that out. But it just means that you can actually send off notifications to those people, or it may be that you actually alter the approval rules to suit those approvals that are going through to those people. Or it might even just be as simple as giving them access to approve through the app, or even giving them some training on how to, kind of do that more effectively. So again, having this information in front of you allows you to then set things up, check things in a little bit more detail, and then start to kind of tweak things from that level. Now, the last element that I wanted to just talk about is really centered around general ledger. Now, general ledger closing month-end process is really a major part for businesses, and they really lean on systems to tell them what to do. But what you tend to find is that some of those efficiencies really can be harnessed in terms of the automation within MYOB Advanced. Now, one thing from a planning point of view is you've obviously got reports that you can build. So you've got like open invoices, open bills, checking what hasn't been released, so on and so forth. But what I want to talk about actually is to do with, from a tracking point of view, if I go into my educational resources, it's a very simple method, but from a kind of planning point of view, is really setting up something like a wiki article to look at your month-end process. So here I've just created a wiki article just to do with AR, AP, inventory, fixed assets, currency management, tax, reporting. So it's really working out what do you do at the end of the month. And then from there, I've just set up simply open the next period, finish invoicing, applying payments and credits. And I've created links directly to those different areas. So from that, if I go into open next period, we can start to then set what we want to do. So from this side of things, we can actually look at this manage financial periods and start to make it more efficient by adding in automation. So from the opening of periods, I can just go in and go, right, on a monthly basis, I want to open this new period up on the 1st of the month. And then I can just set that. And then it means that it's one less thing I have to do to actually remember. So again, it just means you're looking at what you currently do, working out, is there a process within MYOB Advanced, and actually automating that process to make it more efficient and give you more time on doing things. Now, in a similar kind of vein, it could be that you actually want to do and set up your reporting. So from a financial perspective, you can set up, your actual versus budget, your consolidated reporting. And again, it's just allowing you to work out, based on what we're actually doing, what do we need to automate? So in this case, we can actually automate the sending of reports to certain people to check, to make sure everything's correct, and editing, and scheduling that after you've saved it. So you can send out those reports for that point of view. Now, ultimately going back, you then make those fine kind of tunes based on your wiki and, those kind of steps that you're going through. But then you start to go, right, now we've got those bedded in. What are the extra elements that we can start to tweak to make it extra things speed up? So from that point of view, you can start to look at simple things like allocations. So from an allocation perspective, and this is something I'll focus on in my next session in terms of client favorites, but from an allocation point of view, it means that we could potentially start to set up allocations to do those splittings. So once a bill comes in, it can split like marketing costs, rent costs, rate costs via this allocations area. And we can then start to kind of split it based on distribution methods. But ultimately, we can actually run allocations as an automated feature. So just the running of allocations, we can then set up again a schedule for it. And it just does that set and forget. And then it just does it on a monthly, weekly basis based on that side of things as well. Now, the last thing in terms of the GL side of things would be probably in regards to the closing of certain things. So from a receivable, if I go to close financial periods, you can see in here that I could actually just set up this step as an automation as well. So really, when you're looking at the kind of elements within that wiki page that we worked out to start off with, these are the different bits. It's all about setting up the areas in which you're going to kind of streamline and then working through those and working out whether or not there's more efficient ways of actually doing that. So that's what I'm going to go through in this session. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hand back to Grant, and hopefully in the next session, I'll go a little bit deeper into allocations.